could. Actually, I don't see where I've got the mute everybody. So if the meeting facilitator could please mute everybody, I would appreciate it.
There we go. You should see mute all. I just did it, but just for future reference.
Yeah,
if you click...
I see it now down there.
Okay.
People. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Okay. So it is now 5:30 and a quorum is present. So I'll call this meeting of the Plan Commission of April 27th to order. And as we did the last time, our IT meeting facilitator will give us a few hints about how we will proceed for this meeting.
Okay, welcome to our virtual Plan Commission meeting. We're going to cover a few basic items before beginning. To the members of the Plan Commission and city staff, the chair, clerk, and technical facilitator are responsible for muting and unmuting committee members. Please be mindful that during any roll call, all panelists will be unmuted until completed, at which time the chair will place panelists back on mute. Voting will be considered unanimous. However, if you object to a unanimous vote, please use the raise hand feature when the chair asks for objections. After clicking participants at the bottom of your screen, you can find the raise hand feature at the bottom of the participants list. Also, use the raise hand feature when you'd like to be recognized to speak or ask questions. This includes staff who are being asked a question. The chair will do their best to call on committee members in the order which hands are raised. Lowering your hand will take you out of the queue. Please wait for the chair to unmute you before speaking. If you lose connection at any point during the meeting, you can reconnect by clicking the link or calling the number on your original email. If you are watching a live stream, please mute the stream now. There is a 30 to 40-second delay and the audio will cause feedback when you are unmuted. Members of the public who have registered to speak, when your name is called, the facilitator will find your name, matching the name provided in your registration, and permit you to speak. If your name does not match, you will not be permitted to speak. Please wait until you are unmuted to begin talking. The clerk will tell you when your time is up. If you need to share documentation with the committee, please send it via email to planning@cityofmadison.com. Unless there are questions of you, you will be unable to speak for the remainder of the meeting. In order to keep the meeting with the best quality we can, if you do not wish to speak, we encourage you to go watch the meeting streamed at cityofmadison.com/city channel or youtube.com/City of Madison. Find us on Charter, Digital 994, and Uverse 99. Chair, the floor is yours.
Thank you. The first item on the agenda is public comment, Legistar 60306. And we do have a comment email with questions, which is not really appropriate to be answering right now. But Ms. Stouter, in her role as director of the planning department, will be drafting a response to that inquiry. But we wanted you to know that we had received that. Any comments on that or questions? Commissioner.
Hello?
Yes, Commissioner Burnett.
Yes, I'm sorry. It's a question not related to what you just discussed. I was trying to figure out if there are any absences tonight and if I would be considered a voting member.
I'm sorry, could you speak up a little louder?
Any absences tonight? Am I a voting member tonight? As an alternate, I wanted to check.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I don't believe we do have any absences. Thank you. Okay, any comments or questions about agenda item 1? Seeing none, we will go on to communications, disclosures, and recusals. Are there any disclosures or recusals? Alder Rummel.
Thank you. On item number 10, I do know both the applicants. One was a neighbor of mine for a really long time, but I don't believe it will affect my judgment or my decision.
Thank you, Alder Rummel. Commissioner Hagenow.
Yes, thank you. Item number 7 is being proposed and it is within about a half a mile of a property that the company I work for manages. However, it will not have any effect on my decision.
Thank you, Commissioner Hagenow. Okay, I don't see any other. I do have a communication I would like to share. Commissioner Rui, this will be his last meeting, and I just wanted to acknowledge the work that he has done. I know that the Plan Commission as a whole and I will really miss you. I've really appreciated the good questions that you raise and your willingness to do the hard work necessary to positively impact the outcome of development proposals. And you really have made a positive difference in the streetscape of our city, the livability and the success of the new buildings in our city. So I want to say thank you. And Commissioner Rui.
Yeah, I was going to save this for later, but I'll say it now so we can adjourn quicker. There's some thoughts that I like to see get carried forward after I leave. And I had a list of just a few of them. We started one back in February. I'd like to see a bird-friendly building ordinance enacted. I think it's very important. I'd like to see a stronger green building ordinance, including green roofs. I hope we institutionalize the Urban Forestry Task Force report recommendations. I'm hoping for a stronger historic preservation, and it's not just for the rich and famous, it's for everyone. A stronger enforcement of dark sky ordinances, a stronger pedestrian consideration in isthmus construction especially. And I'd like, I've struggled with it, better definition of usable open space, especially when it comes to balconies and how we can enhance balconies and to get that in a better definition. Other than that, I've been on 9 years. It's been a great 9 years. I have learned a lot. And I want to say this to the other board members. You have a great planning staff under great leadership. Support them. They are really good. I appreciated them these last 9 years. And I also have the same comments about the commission itself. It's a really great, strong commission, a lot of good questions and responses, and under great leadership and Liddell. So work together and let's make Madison a better community. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rui. Okay, moving on to the minutes of the April 13th regular meeting. Are there any additions or corrections to the minutes? Do I have a motion then? Commissioner Rui.
I move approval.
Okay. Commissioner Cantrell. Okay, thank you. Okay, we have a motion and a second. All those I'll assume unanimous consent unless there's a raised hand to indicate otherwise. Okay, unanimous consent. The minutes are approved. Okay, our schedule of meetings. We have 2 meetings in May, the 11th and the 18th, and then 2 meetings in June, June 8th and June 29th. Okay, then routine business is our next item. The following items listed in this section of the agenda are referred to the Plan Commission as generally required by Section 62.23 Paren 2 Wisconsin statutes and Section 16.01 of the Madison General Ordinances, which require that the Common Council refer any question concerning the location of any public building, the location, extension, or widening of any street, park, or other public grounds within the city to the Plan Commission for its consideration and report regarding consistency with the city's comprehensive plan before final action is taken. Further, the Plan Commission is required to provide a recommendation to the council on the acquisition of public land for the establishment or enlargement of streets, parks, playgrounds, sites for public buildings, and reservations pertaining to the same, and the conveyance of any surplus real estate not needed for these purposes, with reservations concerning the future use and occupation of such real estate, so as to protect the public works of the city and to preserve the view, appearance, light, air, and usefulness of such public works, and to promote the public health and welfare as recommended in the adopted plans and policies. We do have 2 items under routine business. Agenda item 2, Legistar 60209, discontinuing and vacating a remaining portion of the public street right-of-way, Garden Street, being located in the southeast quarter of the northwest quarter, also part of Government Lot 3 of Section 26, Township 7 North, Range 9 East, City of Madison, Dane County, Wisconsin, in the 13th Alder District. And agenda item 3, Legistar 22227, authorizing the mayor and the city clerk to execute a release of public water main easements and accept the grant of new public water main easements from Madison Area Technical College across portions of the properties located at 1853, 1835, and 1849 Wright Street in the 12th Alder District. Do I have a motion? Alder Rui has moved approval. Do I have a second? Commissioner Cantrell has seconded. Are there any comments, questions? Seeing none, I will assume unanimous consent of both of these agenda items unless I see a raised hand. Seeing none, both of these agenda items are approved. We have a couple of minutes before 5:45, so I will move on then to Ms. Stouter to give her secretary's report, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Again, I just want to echo Chair Zeller's words about Mike Rui. I think that staff has greatly appreciated your service on this commission, Mike, and you'll certainly be missed. So I wanted to thank you again from staff. And then looking ahead, our next meeting on May 11th, we are likely to have quite a long meeting, and I mentioned this last time as well. A lot of the projects on this agenda are going to the Urban Design Commission this Wednesday, and that's the first time the Urban Design Commission has met in the past month plus. So that's one of the reasons for so many items falling on one agenda. The first item that I'll mention, you'll have back before you 935 West Johnson Street, and the Plan Commission had referred that to Landmarks Commission. It's going there on May 4th. And so that will likely be back to Plan Commission. The next item, 2524 Winnebago Street. This is the corner building at the Union Corner site, Milwaukee Street and East Washington Avenue, with 105 apartments in a mixed-use building. a couple items down, 1109 to 1123 South Park Street. We'll have a demolition and conditional use for a new 3-story mixed-use building, including 44 apartments. On Felland Road, 4088 Felland Road, an amended planned development to allow construction of a 17-unit and 33-unit apartment building, and also to approve the SIP, the specific implementation plan for a 17-unit building. 3040 Commercial Avenue and McCormick Avenue will have a rezoning and the conditional use to construct a new 4-unit apartment building and 3 8-unit apartment buildings. And then on both Gardner Road and Sheboygan Avenue, those next 2 items are related to the Summit Smith proposal at Madison Yards, close to Hilldale. We'll have 5567 Odana Road, demolition and a new 5-story mixed-use building with 79 apartments on Odana Road. I'll mention 601 Bayview. This is the demolition and conditional use for a phased approach to rebuilding multifamily development at Bayview. And then finally, the last I'll mention is 2219 Monroe Street. This is the conditional use for lighting at Edgewood High School. So again, that meeting is shaping up to be quite a substantial set of items to be discussed. I think looking forward then 1 week later on May 18th, one of the items that's not shown on your agenda because it hasn't been formally introduced yet, but staff does anticipate that we'll have the stormwater ordinance before you on May 18th for consideration. And that's something that you've learned a bit about at our first Plan Commission work session this year. But that should be introduced and at Plan Commission May 18th. We'll also have at 8110 and 8134 Midtown Road. This is the project that was recently referred, and we'll be back before you with a commercial component in that largely multifamily residential project. We'll have a couple items down. 126 Langdon Street. This is a conditional use for a 7-story, 107-unit apartment building on Langdon. And then I'll mention. Actually, I think that will round out the ones that I'll mention for May 18th. We'll see if any others happen to be referred. We'll certainly revise that before our next meeting. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ms. Statter. Okay, moving ahead to the public hearing. The first thing we'll take up is the consent agenda. It is the custom of the Plan Commission to remove from the agenda those items on which the staff believes an applicant has had sufficient review to warrant approval with all of the conditions placed upon it by the various city departments, and on which the applicant accepts those conditions, and there are no individuals who have registered to speak in opposition to the item tonight. These items are placed onto a consent agenda, and they are addressed at the beginning of the public hearing section of our meeting. So then people on those items can sign off early, unless a member of the commission requests separation, in which case the item is removed from the consent agenda and taken in the regular course of business. Of the items before us today, the following are proposed for the consent agenda. Agenda item 7 and agenda item 9. Do any of the Plan Commission members wish to have either of those taken off of the consent agenda? I don't see any raised hands, so I will read those 2 items into the consent agenda. So agenda item 7, 59685 2122 Luann Lane, 14th Alder District. Consideration of a conditional use in the commercial center district for a multifamily dwelling with greater than 8 units, and consideration of a conditional use in the commercial center district for accessory buildings exceeding 800 square feet of area and 10% of lot area to allow an office building to be converted into a 17-unit apartment building and to construct detached garages. Agenda item 9, Legistar 59928, located at 2911 North Sherman Avenue in the 12th Alder District, consideration of a conditional use in the Commercial Corridor Transitional District to convert a restaurant tavern into a restaurant nightclub. I will open the public hearing, and I don't believe we have registrations on either of those. Let me just double check that. No, we have no registrations on those. I will close the public hearing. Is there a motion? Commissioner Cantrell.
I move approval of the consent agenda.
Thank you. Commissioner Rui.
I second.
Thank you. I will assume unanimous consent unless there's a raised hand to object. Seeing no raised hand, the motion passes. Moving on now to the items that were not on the consent agenda. The first one is agenda item 4, Legistar 60088, creating section 28.022 through 00437 of the Madison General Ordinances to change the zoning of properties located at 7718 Mineral Point Road, 9th Alder District, from temporary agriculture to commercial center districts to Commercial Corridor Transitional District. And considering together with agenda item 5, Legistar 59703, located at 7718 Mineral Point Road, 9th Alder District, consideration of a demolition permit to demolish a single-family residence, consideration of a conditional use in the proposed Commercial Corridor Transitional District for a vehicle access sales and service window, and consideration of a conditional use to reduce the number of off-street loading spaces required as specified in section 28.141(13) to allow construction of a 2-story bank with a detached vehicle access sales and service window. Commissioner Rui, did you intend to have your hand up? Okay. Hold on.
There.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, there. No.
No, okay.
Okay.
Okay. We'll have a presentation by staff, and I believe that Mr. Parks, if you could raise your hand. Okay, Mr. Parks.
Good evening, members of the Plan Commission. Items 4 and 5 regard a request to rezone property recently attached into the city of Madison from the town of Middleton at 7718 Mineral Point Road from temporary agricultural and commercial center zoning to the CCT Commercial Corridor Transitional District, as well as approval of a demolition permit to raise an existing 1-story single-family residence, and conditional use approvals for a vehicle access sales and service window for a proposed 2-story bank to be developed on the overall property. The applicant is also requesting conditional use approval to reduce to 0 the number of required off-street loading spaces required in the zoning code. The Planning Division has reviewed the proposed zoning map amendment and as well as the demolition permit and conditional use requests, and believe that the standards for approval can be met. The request is generally consistent with the community mixed use recommended for the site and most of this section of Mineral Point Road by the 2018 Comprehensive Plan. Of note for the Plan Commission, the applicant has submitted memos for the Commission's consideration, substantiating their desire to not have a designated loading space for the proposed bank, and indicating that they believe that they can handle whatever deliveries the bank requires in standard parking stalls. Also, they have submitted a memo regarding why the number of trees on the site cannot be preserved. Both of those are attached to the legislative file for the demolition permit and conditional use, which is number 5 on the agenda. Regarding the trees, the applicant believes that the reasons for the removal include that many of them are overgrown, that they don't feel that the trees will survive, at least the trees closest to Mineral Point Road, will not survive the regrading needed to bring the site up to the level of High Point Road along the western property line as well as Mineral Point Road, and that much of that grading is needed to install the public sidewalks that don't exist along the property frontage, which are being required as a condition of approval of the project. Note for the record that Alder Skidmore has submitted support for the project. That's also attached and was included in the late items you received right before the meeting. That his memo notes that the applicant is saving as many of the mature trees as possible and practical while still developing a viable business, and that he has received no concerns expressed by nearby neighborhood residents or the neighborhood association to the north. So in closing, staff believes that the proposal to redevelop 7718 Mineral Point Road with a 2-story bank and detached vehicle access sales and service window in the proposed CCT district can meet the standards for approval and is consistent with the comprehensive plan. I'd be happy to answer questions after the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parks. I will open the public hearing, and we do have several registrants. The first registrant is Andrew Kerr, 756 North Milwaukee Street, Suite 250, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in support and wishing to speak. He indicated he was not representing an organization, but my understanding is he is representing Associated Bank. Mr. Kerr.
Good evening. Thank you for your time. That's accurate. I am representing Associated Bank. We are the architects of record, Rinka Architecture. So we have developed a site plan in association with Kapoor Engineering, who are also here and available to speak. I would say that generally the summary that you heard this evening was quite comprehensive, and we believe that this development is been done as sensitively as possible to the existing site conditions. The grades along Mineral Point Road and High Point Road were raised at some point in the past. And so there's a significant grade change between the curb elevation and elevation of the site, as much as 4 feet in just a couple of feet of lateral distance in a couple of locations. So extensive regrading of the site is required for us to be able to develop it. There's, I believe, if memory serves, 16 feet of grade change between the between the high point at the southeast corner and the low point at the northwest corner. And so meeting the existing grades on High Point Road and Mineral Point Road, connecting those sidewalks, as well as creating a reasonably level site for us to develop a building on, requires extensive regrading, and as part of that process, a number of those trees will have to be removed. We work very closely with staff and with the alder to minimize the impact of that. And we believe we have a plan that's as sensitive to the existing conditions as possible, while still maintaining a viable development site for the bank. Happy to answer any questions that anyone has.
Thank you, Mr. Kerr. Are there any questions at this time? We do have several other registrants from the development team to be heard from. Alder Lemmer.
Thank you. I think the material said that you're going to be recycling the Quonset hut, but there wasn't other details about what exactly we're going to do. So I was wondering if you could speak to that.
That's actually a request by the city. So that would be handled through the general contractor who will be removing it in a way that can be recycled and reused. But it was a request by the city. We're happy to accommodate that. We don't specifically, Associated Bank does not have plans for that. So we would want to work with the city to find an appropriate use for that structure.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder Lemmer. Seeing no other raised hands, I'll go to our next registrant, Kevin Byrne, 7711 North Fort Washington Road, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in support and wishing to speak. Not showing as representing an organization, but again, I believe he is representing Associated Bank. Mr. Byrne.
Good evening. Thank you. Yes, Kevin Byrne, landscape architect with Kapoor. We were the engineering firm and landscape architecture firm on the project. As Andrew stated, the summary to date is very conclusive of everything we've taken a look at and done for the project. We have tried to be very sensitive in regards to working with the site and a lot of the existing conditions that are out there. And we believe we've put together a good package. We believe we've gone above and beyond to implement additional landscape on the property to kind of bring this back and let the site fit in with the existing conditions, but also be a new development that will bring an asset to the neighborhood and also clean up the corner of High Point Road and Mineral Point Road with the extensions of the city sidewalks as well as the crosswalk in conjunction with that. I'd be happy to answer any additional questions in regards to the landscaping or site design of the project.
Thank you, Mr. Byrne. Commissioner Cantrell.
Yes, I raised sent staff a question about, there's one of the large trees along Mineral Point, just like east of the driveway off of Mineral Point, that the development team is saving, but it appears that there's one of the parking spaces that is really encroaching into it, and also a retaining wall that looks like it would be very, very close to the base of the tree. So I guess I was just asking if that parking stall could be eliminated, because I think that you have plenty of parking, and the retaining wall adjusted slightly so that it wouldn't encroach on the base of the tree and undermine the integrity of that tree. So that's my question.
So the tree on the southeast corner is in a line with several current stumps that are on the property to the east, where these trees, in conjunction, we're assuming with construction of Mineral Point Road, these trees were left to remain when the road was raised. We agreed to, we wanted to leave that tree in. We've tried to leave in as many trees as possible. That tree currently, just from the previous construction of Mineral Point Road, had probably about a third of its root structure covered in the raising of Mineral Point Road. The tree is showing some signs of decline, not quite as much as the trees that are directly located adjacent to the curb line. But it will also be impacted when we bring the new city sidewalk connection through, which will basically mimic the conditions of the trees to the east that were also tried to remain, but eventually were cut down due to decline. We agree and tried to believe that leaving that tree in, but it's currently in a state of decline currently. And we believe it will also be impacted by the construction of the city sidewalk extension. But we would be willing to investigate that. Potentially, I've walked the site as a landscape architect, but we would be interested potentially, if necessary, to have a arborist also take a look at it and see if there's some significant signs that would indicate whether the tree has a good chance of survival or not.
So you wouldn't object to having the city parks department look at the tree with you to determine if it could be saved, assuming that that parking space, it seems to be, would have to be eliminated, because that really undermines the integrity of the base of the tree. I understand. I was out there yesterday looking at the site, so I understand what you're saying about the other two trees that were on the adjoining property that had been removed. But this one, I think, may have a chance, and I would hope that the city staff could also look at it with you or whomever you would like to see if it could be saved.
Yeah, we have no disagreement. Like I said, I think our bigger concern is it will be impacted similarly by the city sidewalk extension, but we would welcome city staff to look at it, and then we could, discuss the opportunity to save it if it merits it.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Commissioner Rui.
Thank you. In your tree report, I don't recall that you mentioned what kind of species were out there. Did you mention them? I don't.
Predominantly oak trees.
Bur oak, right?
I believe so. We walked the site in wintertime.
Well, you could generally tell a bur oak in wintertime too. Did you measure diameters? A lot of them were pretty big.
Yes, they are fairly significant in size.
So you did the
4-inch plus.
What bothered me, you did the report without species or size, and just hung to the little branches. I wish I would have had a little more detailed report on actually what's out there than what the report says. And bur oaks can be easily identified in wintertime. So just
what additional information would you like?
Well, it's too late now. I mean, you present the report, but I would think in the future you'd want to give a better detail of diameters and the species you're dealing with on removal.
Certainly, we will keep that in mind for next time.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rui. Are there any other questions of this registrant? Seeing none, I'll move on to the next registrant, Ryan Birschbach, 7711 North Port Washington Road, Milwaukee, Wisconsin, in support, wishing to speak, not indicating an organization that he is representing, but again, I believe it is Associated Bank. Mr. Birschbach.
Yeah, thank you. Ryan Bierschbach with Kapoor and Associates. We're the civil engineering firm responsible for the design of the project. Kevin was the landscape architect. I am the civil engineer. Really, I guess I can keep it brief just because Andrew and Kevin basically touched on most of the details of the project. But I guess if anybody has any technical questions or general questions regarding the engineering of the site, I'm available for any open questions or comments.
Thank you, Mr. Birschbach. Are there any questions of Mr. Birschbach? Seeing none, the next registrant is Jeffrey Eaton, 901 Deming Way, Suite 102, Madison, Wisconsin, opposed and wishing to speak. He is representing Brad Stamper, Bankers Bank, 7700 Mineral Point Road in Madison. Mr. Eaton. Mr. Eaton, you are up. Well, I see his name here, but
He is unmuted right now.
pardon me?
He's currently unmuted.
Okay. Now it looks like he's muted.
Oh, yeah.
Mr. Eaton. There seems to be a technical problem with Mr. Eaton. Can you try again, Mr. Eaton? Okay, not hearing anything from Mr. Eaton. I will read the other registrants for this agenda item, and then we will come back and see if we can connect with him. The next registrant is Bill White, 33 East Main Street, Madison, Wisconsin, in support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. Not showing that he is representing any organization, but again, I believe he's representing Associated Bank. Any questions of Mr. White? Seeing none, the next registrant is Audrey Grill, 756 North Milwaukee Street, Suite 250 in Milwaukee. In support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions, not showing as representing an organization, but again, I believe she is representing Associated Bank. Any questions of Ms. Grill? Seeing none, that closes out the registrants for this agenda item. Can we try Mr. Eaton once again? Mr. Eaton? We don't seem to have a connection here. I will ask, are there any questions of any of the registrants? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Are there questions of staff? Alder Rummel.
Thank you. In the staff report, it indicated that you hadn't had a chance to see the tree report. Now we have it. Do you have any comments that, given our conversation, that I might have missed in your earlier introductions?
No.
Mr. Parks.
No, I don't have anything additional to add.
Did you discuss like having a sidewalk go around trees, or should the grade change just make that an impossible option?
Chris Wells reviewed the report, but my understanding is that we haven't gotten to that level of detail yet. Typically, that would happen during the post-approval process prior to issuance of permits. And there is the possibility that if a sidewalk can be moved to accommodate an existing tree, city engineering will try to accommodate that, so long as the sidewalk doesn't end up too close to the back of curb for snow storage purposes, things of that sort. So it's certainly something that can be looked at, but I don't believe that we would be able to commit to it right now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Rummel. Commissioner Spencer.
Thanks. I had a question about the loading on the application. They had indicated that they thought they could waive the off-street loading spaces. I was just wondering if that's kind of common for this kind of building. and use? Are there any safety concerns, with loading around the parking lot area with people walking or driving? I'm just kind of more curious than anything. Thanks.
Yeah, I think for a bank or a similar financial institution, we would probably be fine if they just wanted to use a standard parking spot for loading and deliveries. I believe that it would probably also have been a good question for the applicant, but generally speaking, we're talking about armored vehicle deliveries, occasionally package delivery services that don't necessarily rely on a standard 10 by 35 or 10 by 50 loading stall to do their business versus a restaurant or a retailer where they're going to be receiving deliveries from a variety of vehicles, including larger wheel-based vehicles. So it really isn't a concern that I'm aware of that the loading zone be waived in this case.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Spencer. Commissioner Cantrell.
Yes, for Mr. Parks, the question I have, would it be appropriate to add a condition in the approval of that, the tree that I'm most interested in saving? It's a large oak tree just directly east of the parking lot entrance, that on the plan they show it as saving. They're proposing to save it, but I think in order to actually save it, a parking space will have to be eliminated, at least one space, and a retaining wall would have to be adjusted. Would it be appropriate to have Parks Department, the arborist, look at that with the applicant in order to see if that is if the tree has some potential of survival, and if those adjustments would be appropriate?
Historically, the city forester, now housed in the streets division, by the way, they have resisted requests to look at trees or tree preservation documents that don't apply to public lands, so right-of-way or park lands, things of that nature. And so if you wanted to word a condition to work with staff in general and my apologies, my 4-year-old is racing above like an elephant, to have staff work with the applicant to try to preserve the tree at the southeastern corner of the site, that we can do that sort of writ large, but not to bring the city forestry staff into it, because they have historically not wanted to weigh in on tree preservation on private property or as part of private development.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Commissioner Rui.
Thank you. A little follow-up to that question. Would you have a problem with that particular parking spot being eliminated? Either way, it being eliminated?
No, I don't think staff would have a concern with it. I don't believe that the project is even remotely close to being short on parking, so I'll probably spare one.
Okay. The other question I had is, you talked about moving the sidewalk closer to the curb. I think that probably is impossible along Mineral Point. Is it possible for you to work with the developer to move it by way of an easement around the trees to the north?
I'm sorry, I don't know if I understood the question.
Well, the trees are too close to the curb now to put in a sidewalk. It'd be tough. But if you ran them around by way of an easement closer to the bank building, could you get them around that way? Would that be something you could work with as a suggestion that we might do by resolution?
I suppose that's probably fine.
Or maybe just hearing it verbally right now is an alternative. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Rui. Are there other questions of staff? Seeing none, I am looking for a motion. Commissioner Cantrell.
Yes, I will move that the Plan Commission forward the rezoning to the City Council with the favorable recommendation, and find the demolition standards met on this project, and that the conditional use conditions and standards also can be met with the reduction of the number of off-street loading spaces in this project to eliminate that requirement for this project too. But with one additional condition that that the developer work with staff to potentially adjust the parking lot to eliminate a space near the southeast corner of the Mineral Point entrance, so that the large oak tree could be preserved at the southeast corner of this project.
Alder Lemmer.
I just want a second. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Cantrell, did you wish to speak to your motion?
Yes, I think this is a good project. Unfortunately, we're going to be losing a lot of large oak trees, and I think this is the last redevelopment site that we have along Mineral Point. But again, I think it's a good project, and they are preserving some of the large trees to the rear of the site, which is good. But I think that overall it's a good project.
Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Are there other comments, other discussion? Seeing none, I will assume unanimous consent unless there is a raised hand to object. Not seeing a raised hand, motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, the next item on our agenda is agenda item 6, Legistar 59187. It's a revised request located at 5133 to 5237 University Avenue in the 19th Alder District. Consideration of a demolition permit to demolish an office building and restaurant. Consideration of a conditional use in the Suburban Employment Zoning District for multifamily dwellings. Consideration of a conditional use in the SE District for a dwelling unit in a mixed-use building. Consideration of a conditional use in the Suburban Employment District for live-work units. Consideration of a conditional use in the Suburban Employment District for accessory outdoor recreation, and consideration of a conditional use to reduce the number of off-street loading spaces required as specified in 28.141(13) to construct a mixed-use development containing approximately 12,000 square feet of commercial space and 85 apartments in 3 buildings. And we do have a preservation by staff. Mr. Parks, if you could raise your hand again so I can. I believe it's going to be Mr. Parks speaking. Mr. Parks?
Hand raised. There we are.
Okay, go.
All right.
You're up.
Members of the Plan Commission, item number 6 regards the demolition of 2 buildings at 5133 and 5237 University Avenue. 5133 is a 1-story Quonset hut structure the other at 5237, a former Perkins restaurant. I'd like to note that the applicant has submitted a slightly revised request from what was on the agenda 2 weeks ago, and that they are seeking approval to develop the site with 3 mixed-use buildings containing 12,208 square feet of commercial space spread across the 3 buildings, and have increased the number of dwelling units from 79 to 85. And I would like to note that there was a typo in an earlier version of the addendum. The project will include 38 one-bedroom units, 40 two-bedroom units, and 7 3-bedroom units. And the revised plans and letter of intent are in Legistar with today's date on them, and I would encourage you to reference those during the conversation. Looking at the project, planning staff believes that the Plan Commission can find the demolition permit and conditional use standards met. The proposed development is generally consistent with the community mixed use recommendation for the site in the 2018 comprehensive plan, despite the site's suburban employment zoning, which actually allows dwelling units in mixed use buildings, as well as at least the opportunity for ground level commercial uses, recognizing, however, that some of those ground floor uses may need to come back to the Plan Commission for specific consideration prior to occupancy. But in general, mixed use buildings are allowable in SE zoning with conditional use approval. And staff believes that the Plan Commission can find that the standards for approval are met. Staff will note that concerns were raised about access to the site, which is limited to a certain degree due to the median on University Avenue, that there are conditions of approval from the traffic engineer that are noted in the April 13th staff report. Those conditions of approval still apply to this project despite the project revisions. And that staff is also recommending some minor site plan revisions to improve the accessibility of the site for pedestrians from the University Avenue sidewalk, and that those conditions are noted in the staff report. Urban Design Commission reviewed the project at its March 11th meeting and granted initial approval subject to the conditions that are noted on page 10 of the April 13th staff report. And staff would be happy to answer any questions after the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Parks. We do have registrants for this. I will open the public hearing. The first registrant is Justin Fram, 7402 Stone Ridge Drive, Weston, Wisconsin, in support and wishing to speak. He is representing JSD Professional Services Incorporated, located also in Weston, Wisconsin. Mr. Fram, you will have 3 minutes.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, thank you. Justin Frame, JSD. We were the site civil engineer and landscape architect on this project. We've acknowledged the conditions set forth by staff in the staff report. We feel we're able to work with all staff on those. The site plan really was designed to take into account the constraints of the site, specifically a 19-foot storm bisecting, a regional storm culvert bisecting the site, the median cut on the University Avenue access point for ingress into the site, and really the grading from east to west and from north to south. We feel the site has maximized the balance of site plan parking as well as maintaining open space and quality open space in the rear, in addition to demands of stormwater management, landscape plantings. And we've worked closely with staff in planning to observe the zoning requirements of this district and have actually increased setbacks from the west and from the south beyond minimum standards. We feel that has contributed to a balanced site plan and also mitigating impacts of the site to neighboring properties, including Trillium to the west and south, in maintaining parking between the building separation to those adjacent properties. So keeping the parking in the core and transitioning to adjacent properties with landscape, increased setback, and what we feel are well proportioned buildings. I'm available to answer any questions. I do want to note we have picked up a few of the site conditions that were set forth that Tim had noted. One item specifically, an added access sidewalk from University Avenue to the front of what would be Building A, or the northernmost building. And then an additional sidewalk closer to the building, which provides direct access to the front and entrance of building. Any questions on site or landscape? I am available. Thank you.
Are there any questions of Mr. Fram? Seeing none, thank you, Mr. Fram. And we will move to our next registrant, Dale Streitenberger, 14375 Wisconsin Avenue, Elm Grove, Wisconsin, in support and wishing to speak with JLA Architects, 311 East Chicago Street in Milwaukee. Mr. Streitenberger.
Yeah, this is Dale Streitenberger. I'm in the Milwaukee office, but we're Madison and Milwaukee. And if you look at the architectural renderings as well as the elevations, you'll notice that we have a series of structures that kind of create almost a representation of almost a townhome with a ground level arcade and covered entry leading into the mixed use. So the building materials we're using are not only masonry and concrete panels, but also some cementitious siding and a few accent materials just to give it some eye pop. The main anchor out at University is the restaurant. It's on the far right-hand side there. And that then steps up to the 4-story building that has basically 2 levels of underground parking underneath the first, well, all the buildings. That's why we get an incredible amount of covered parking on the site. And then we worked with the neighborhood real closely, including a sloped roof along the western edge of the site so that we get as much sunlight down into the single family neighboring buildings, which was something that they were really quite taken back that we were actually considering sunlight coming down into the units. But you can see it's a pretty straightforward palette. And we have some minor adjustments that need to take place from our April 13th meeting with Urban Design, which we'll do at the last review. So that's pretty much the overview of the architecture. Any questions? I'll be happy to answer those.
Thank you, Mr. Streitenberger. Are there any questions from commissioners? Alder Heck.
Thank you. I'm not sure if this is for the current speaker or the previous speaker, but I noticed there's, a desire to perhaps not have a loading space that's required. And I wonder if either of you could speak to your proposed or what you think your tenant mix might be in your retail spaces and why they might not require a loading spot.
Well, I can take that question. The restaurant is out front, so it stands on its own with off hours loading and unloading. But the primary tenants that we're after in this building are unique, smaller type tenants, things like, personal trainer or some massage therapy, something that's a little bit softer, maybe even some insurance type business, things that people recognize are in the neighborhood and it's tucked in. So we don't have a lot of visibility for the retail off the main street, or off of University Avenue. So we're looking at a tenant mix that's going to be slightly less vibrant from the standpoint of just being able to see the retail space from the street. So we just have a little bit different tact on this type of tenant, and that's why we made some adjustments as well with the unit count, because of the marketplace that the marketing institution has informed us to work toward more single family, one bedrooms, as well as a slightly different retail tenant.
Thank you. And then what are the kind of ranges of square footage in the commercial retail spaces?
Well, they can be divided up into, like 500 square feet all the way up to the 5,000 square feet for the restaurateur. As you know, on the site, there used to be a Perkins. So Tom, the owner, is looking to get a real nice name brand, unique restaurant on the anchor of the site. And this is the 5,000 square feet that's outlined, 5,000 up to 12,000 square feet.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Alder Heck. Are there other questions of this registrant? Seeing none, the next registrant is Tom Deegan of Madison, Wisconsin, in support and wishing to speak, representing Deegan and Associates of Madison, Wisconsin. Mr. Deegan.
Hello, do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm the owner and developer of this property. And regarding the question of the deliveries, we feel the restaurant will take deliveries with a box truck. And then the other smaller tenants, as Dale mentioned, financial services, insurance, they will have minimal deliveries also. So there won't really be a need for any semi-type traffic activity through the site. So really the anchor tenant, the main tenant, is the restaurant on University Avenue. We're very excited to bring that to the neighborhood, replacing some of that neighborhood restaurant food service function that the Perkins had or delivered for many, many years. So we're very excited about this project. There were some, as Justin mentioned, some design considerations that we worked carefully through. The storm sewer going through the site was a major challenge that really led to the 3 buildings because of the way that storm sewer bisected the site. And the access to University Avenue, we really wanted to use that existing median break. And we have several traffic study done and updated. And that information has been sent back to the traffic department. So we feel that those concerns are addressed and that median break will accommodate our access to the site really quite nicely. So thank you. I'm available for more questions if necessary.
Are there any questions of Mr. Deegan? Alder Rummel.
Could you or one of your team talk about the stormwater of the site? Just this quick look looks like it's a lot of surface parking. What is your plan for capturing water on site?
Mr. Deegan, are you going to respond?
Yes, I would. Is Justin Frame available to answer that?
Yes.
He's unmuted.
Mr.
Justin? Okay, if Justin isn't available, then I'll address that. We have 2 major storm retention, surface retention facilities at the back area of the site. And there's this site also has some restrictions due to the proximity to the city well. And there's a certain radius that we're not allowed to have stormwater retention within that radius. So that precludes having stormwater toward the front of the site. And also the topography really works best for the stormwater to be toward the south of the site. So we have two larger surface facilities there that handle all the stormwater, the needs of the site. And also provide ample green space. That's some of the additional setback that Dale mentioned in the site design. I believe we have close to 60 feet of rear setback to the building to provide that green space, the stormwater retention, an outdoor patio area for the tenants.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. This is Justin. I believe I was disconnected there. I think Tom covered that fairly well. I'll just add that we are meeting city redevelopment requirements with those stormwater basins in the rear. We are exempt from infiltration given the wellhead protection buffer zone. And certainly our stormwater management has been taken into account to treat all of the surface parking areas. And based on the current size, we're actually providing a bit of an additional above and beyond the requirements with our stormwater management plan currently.
Thank you, Mr. Frame. Alder Furman.
Thank you, Chair. I had a question for the applicant about the allocation of parking. This application originally had 79 units and then was revised in the last week or so to bring it up to 85. I believe if my math is correct, we're still at about 116 indoor parking, even with the additional adding the additional one-bedroom units. I wanted to see if the applicant could talk a little bit about how they plan on allocating parking.
Yes, this is Tom Deegan speaking. Yeah, so the 6 additional one-bedroom units resulted from a real allocation of space. We had quite a few one-bedroom units that were really quite large and were ending with inefficient designs. And some of the 2 bedrooms were also a little oversized. So we took a closer look at that and basically reallocated space and then configured 6 additional one-bedroom units. And as we looked at our parking and our demand assumptions, our expectation is that quite a few, but not all of the 2-bedroom units will require 2 parking stalls, and some, but not all the 1-bedroom units will require most likely 1. Some might require 2, but most might require 1 because there'll be a fair bit of single occupancy in the 1-bedroom units. So with those, with our expectations and our assumptions, the parking count that we had for interior parking for residential was still within acceptable parameters. So there's no need to increase the parking.
Anything else, Alder Furman?
That's all for now. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions of this applicant, registrant? I do have a question. There were questions in regard to loading dock, and you spoke to the commercial tenants. I didn't hear you mention anything about the moving trucks that may be coming, one would assume, to move in tenants of the residential units. How do you intend to handle those?
This is Tom Deegan speaking. We feel those will be delivered also with box trucks and smaller vans and personal vehicles and not semi-traffic. So that can be dealt with temporary parking restriction on existing spaces.
Parking restrictions on spaces within the development?
Yes, all within the development. There'll be some parking spaces that are necessary for staff and maintenance, and those can be then signed for residential move-in, scheduled in cooperation with the tenant moving in, and we can accommodate the trucks that way.
Often people piggyback, and there are larger moving trucks that are moving more than one family. How are you going to handle it when there is a larger truck, a semi?
The site isn't really set up for semi. I think part of the residential move-in package and discussion is how the tenant intends to move into the building. At that point, the expectation will be explained, and what's available as far as temporary parking.
Thank you. The next registrant is William Whisenant, 5205 University Avenue, Madison, Wisconsin, neither support nor oppose, and wishing to speak, not representing anyone. Is he on the line, Mr. Whisenant?
Or we not find a person with that name?
There's
Okay.
nobody in the queue with that name.
Okay, then apparently not. We will not be hearing from him. The next registrant is Jennifer Camp, 3001 Midnight Sun Drive, Sun Prairie, Wisconsin, in support, not wishing to speak, representing JLA Architects in Monona, available to answer questions. And then the last registrant is Eugene Krakow, 31 Craig Avenue, Madison, Wisconsin, in support, not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. Are there questions of any of the registrants? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Are there questions of staff? Alder Furman.
Thank you, Chair. I have a question for Tim Parks. How common is it for a restaurant of that size not to have a loading dock area? And as Chair Zellers talked about, even the move-in of units, how common is it for there not to be the ability to have larger tractor trailers? That's right on University. I'd be very worried that a truck pull off to the side and take up a whole lane of University to do a quote-unquote quick delivery if it's not supported on site. So I wanted to get a little bit better understanding of what concerns we should have with that.
Thank you, Alder. First of all, I think it would be reasonable to ask for a commercial delivery and move in, move out plan for this project. I don't believe we have a condition of approval to that effect now. Usually that's something that comes from the traffic engineering division, but notwithstanding that, it may be appropriate to have that as a condition if the project is approved. I think from the standpoint that deliveries for restaurants can vary based on the type of restaurant. If it's a smaller local provider, they may get more smaller delivery vehicles coming to their site versus more of a national presence sort of restaurant, which may rely on a bigger supply chain that uses larger vehicles. And I mean, notwithstanding that, there is still the potential that even a smaller local restaurant could occasionally have your larger food delivery companies provide their paper goods and their non-food related items. So your Reinhardt Food Services or your Gordon's or your Cisco's. So the presence of a food and beverage establishment does slightly increase the potential for larger format vehicles to do deliveries. And we do know that, interstate movers are as likely to use a large format delivery vehicle as they are a smaller U-Haul. So if it's a concern that you and the commission have, I think it would be reasonable to have something on record with the final approved plans that shows, in lieu of a dedicated off-street loading zone, how the project will handle loading and deliveries.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Furman. Alder Heck.
Thank you, Mr. Parks. The existing fire access lane on the eastern side of the site I see that there's a gate there. Does that mean that that's not normally accessible?
Correct.
Because I was thinking about Commissioner Zeller's question about if a big 18-wheeler were to go in there, could they exit out that way, given that turning around would certainly not be easy, but that apparently is not possible. That's restricted access.
I believe for fire purposes, they would have the ability to, or for delivery even, that they would have the ability to use that. That would be something that would be governed by that cross-access easement between Mr. Deegan and his neighbors. Whether or not that would be used for delivery vehicles as well, I think would depend on the property owner, and I would defer to them to answer that question specifically.
Thank you.
Alder Rummel.
There, somewhere in the conditions, there is something about the loading. I lost it. The loading zone, requiring one to be added. Did you say that before, and I just missed you mentioning that?
The zoning code requires, and it's condition 56 of the April 13th staff report, that 110 by 50 foot loading area with 14 feet of vertical clearance be shown on the plan. However, noting that the required number of loading spaces may be reduced through conditional use approval.
Correct. Well, how does that address the Alder's questions about, is that sufficient?
Well, it's basically a question of to the Plan Commission whether or not to waive the off-street loading requirement. The zoning code requires it based on the size of the buildings within the development, as well as the nature of the uses, that a loading zone that would fit a tractor trailer be provided on the site. However, the applicant is proposing to not provide that or provide loading through alternative means other than a 10 by 50 foot loading zone. And so that's basically, you have the Alder raising questions about whether the project works without the required one loading zone that the zoning code would otherwise mandate for this project, and the applicant's proposal that the project can go forward without the mandated 10 by 50 foot zone.
Thank you for clarifying.
Thank you, Alder. Are there other questions? Alder Furman.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I have another question for Mr. Parks. Is there, I know parking in general on this site has been challenged throughout its development, the planned development. What would a loading zone do if they added one back to what staff is looking for parking requirements, surface level, for example, for the retail space and for guests to the buildings? Is there capacity roughly for them to do something like that and still fall within what staff would find acceptable for parking access for the uses there?
I have to look and see in terms of parking. I don't believe we have an issue. I see in the zoning code requirements that there is no minimum parking requirement for the project. It's possible that individual first floor commercial uses may require a designated number of parking stalls to be provided, but at this point in time, there is no minimum parking requirement. A 10 by 50 foot zone is going to definitely chew up some of the surface parking provided. So how many would depend on where that loading zone is outside of an aisle. And I think I would have to defer to the applicant to determine where through a potential post-approval sign-off process they wanted to show that and the number of parking stalls that it might compromise in order to provide it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alder Furman. Commissioner Cantrell.
Yes, a question from Mr. Parks. What would be the appropriate condition on foregoing the loading space? I think that you were stating something in lieu of a dedicated off-street loading zone, and I didn't pick up the other wording. So could you elaborate on that?
Sure. Typically for projects where there is a requirement to provide off-street loading, these are typically downtown or near downtown. Where these occur, the traffic engineer will most often ask that there be a commercial delivery plan provided, and that separately that there be a residential move-in, move-out plan. And so something similar in this case, whether it's one condition or two, in lieu of the required off-street loading space, that prior to approval, the traffic engineer approves commercial delivery plan for the project and a plan for residential move-in, move-out.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Are there other questions of staff? Alder Heck.
Thank you. I have no further questions for staff, but I would like to ask Mr. Deegan about the fire lane, if that's agreeable.
With no objection from commissioners, I will reopen the public hearing. And could we hear from Mr. Deegan, please?
Yes, am I unmuted?
Yeah, you're unmuted. You're up.
Okay, thank you. I'm ready for a question, please.
Yeah, I was just wondering what the agreement is in terms of access to that fire lane, and if, let's say, a large truck were to come in and there wasn't a dedicated loading zone, would they be able to, park temporarily somewhere? Let's say, would they be able to exit through the fire lane, or is that restricted?
No, it's not restricted in any way, like in that way. That's property that I own, and it's a fire lane, but I have total control over the access of it. And I'm limiting the access out of courtesy to the motorcycle shop that also uses that as access for their shop. So specifically not directing, ongoing continual traffic through there, but that because that might, disrupt Bill Wisnet's business. But I control the access that certainly could be used for deliveries and,
okay.
And fire access and any other type of access.
Okay, thank you. That might come in handy in our further discussion. I'm not sure. Thank you.
Thank you.
While the public hearing is open, are there any other questions of Mr. Deegan? Seeing none, I will reclose the public hearing. Are there further questions of staff? Seeing none, I am looking then for a motion. Commissioner Cantrell.
Sure. I will recommend that the Plan Commission find that the standards for demolition and the conditional use permit for this project are met with all the conditions proposed by staff, and one additional condition as follows: in lieu of a dedicated loading zone, that a move-in, move-out plan and a commercial delivery plan be submitted to the traffic engineer for review and approval.
Do I have a second? Seconded by Commissioner Hagenow. Commissioner Cantrell, do you wish to speak to your motion?
Yes, I think this is an overall a good project. I think this property has lots of constraints, as the report pointed out. But I think the mixed use aspect and that the project is also minimizing its impacts, adjoining the residential neighbors, which I think is one of the good aspects of the plan. So that's why I'm recommending that we support it.
Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Commissioner Rui.
Thank you. I wanted a clarification on that, Mr. Cantrell. Is that in lieu of condition number 46? 56, I mean?
56, but I think that would, yes, that would waive that requirement. Yes.
Okay, but it would have that wording that we could do that to go with that. That we could basically waive it down to 0 in lieu of.
Yes, that would be my intent.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments, discussions? Alder Furman.
Thank you, Chair. This project has been in development since 2017. It's been an incredibly long process that started before I became Alder and then continued. As people have pointed out, it's a really unique site with some constraints. I know staff had a lot of trouble with some of the earlier ideas for the site, and so I appreciate the applicant making changes to reflect staff feedback. It's surrounded by very small houses in the back, and so the applicant has I think done generally a good job of trying to shield their development as much as possible from those small properties in that area. I am disappointed in the last minute changes. I am disappointed in the lack of loading zone, but I am supportive of the conditions that the Plan Commission has put in place that will require traffic engineering to sign off on a plan. I'm certainly worried about University Avenue being used, for any period of time for a truck to pull up the side of the road if the large restaurant there requires that. So generally, I think this is a good plan and a good use of the site, and that's my feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Alder. Any other comments? Okay, then we are ready to vote, and I will be assuming unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand objecting. Seeing no raised hand, the motion passes unanimously. Thank you. Moving on, the next item on the agenda is agenda item 8, Legistar 59927, located at 1020 Sherman Avenue, 2nd Alder District, consideration of a conditional use in their traditional residential consistent to district to construct an accessory building exceeding 576 square feet of area, consideration of a conditional use for lakefront development, and consideration of a conditional use in the traditional residential consistent to district for an accessory dwelling unit, to allow construction of an accessory building containing a one-stall garage, an accessory dwelling unit, and a usable rooftop. And we do have a presentation by staff. Sydney Prusak. Okay, go ahead, Ms. Prusak.
Thank you, Chair and members of the Plan Commission. The applicant requests approval of a conditional use to construct a 700 square foot accessory building containing a one-stall garage, accessory dwelling unit, and rooftop deck on a lakefront parcel. I will refer to the accessory dwelling unit as an ADU from here on out. No changes to the primary residence on the property are proposed with this development. As proposed, the garage portion of the accessory building will be 280 square feet and the ADU will be 420 square feet for a total building footprint of 700 square feet. And in keeping with MGO section 28.131, parent 1, parent B, no individual accessory building shall exceed 576 square feet in a traditional residential district except by conditional use approval. In regards to this application, the proposed structure is 124 square feet larger than that requirement, but regardless of the size, an ADU is a conditional use in every residential zoning district, and any accessory building on zoning lots abutting Lake Mendota also require conditional use approval. So therefore, even if this proposal met the size requirements for the TRC2 zoning district, it would still be a conditional use given the lakefront development standards. According to the submitted plans, the accessory building will be located on the northwest portion of the lot behind the principal residence. It will be accessed from an existing shared driveway with the property to the north, and it appears to meet all the zoning setback requirements. In regards to the conditional use approval standards, the Planning Division believes that this proposal conforms to the low density land use recommendations in both the comprehensive plan and the Tenny Lapham neighborhood plan. This property is also located in the Sherman Avenue National Historic District, and the city's preservation planner found that the proposed accessory building appears to meet those district standards as well. And I can elaborate more on her findings after the public hearing if the commissioners would like more detail. And staff acknowledges the unique shape of this lot and the fact that it's a lakefront parcel, but still believes that the proposal can meet all the applicable approval standards. The proposed accessory building is narrow and the roof is low and flat, which staff believes responds to the uniqueness of the property. And in regards to standard 13, which relates specifically to lakefront development, staff notes that the height and bulk comparison is only applicable to principal buildings, and the fact that no changes to the principal building are proposed with this application, the zoning administrator determined that this comparison does not apply. Also, by utilizing the city assessor's database, staff found that there's a varied pattern of development in terms of both detached and attached garages on the lakeside block face of Sherman Avenue, and some properties contain no garages at all or no accessory buildings. Prior to this meeting, staff received multiple letters in opposition to this proposal, many of which were received after the staff report was published to Legistar. The recent comments have since been uploaded to the file and hopefully emailed out to commissioners. The neighbors have a variety of concerns with this proposal, most of them relating to the building placement and design, potential noise from the rooftop patio, and obstruction of lakefront views. However, the Tenny Lapham Neighborhood Association voted to approve this conditional use request. I heard that there was a formal letter from TLNA, but that was not received in time of this meeting. So there, again, the Planning Division believes that this proposal meets all the applicable conditional use standards and recommends that this request be approved by the Plan Commission. If the Plan Commission cannot find that the standards are met, they shall cite substantial evidence in their reasoning and motion clearly listing which standards are not met. And with that, thank you for your time, and I'll turn it back to Chair Zellers.
Thank you, Ms. Prusak. With that, I will open the public hearing. We do have several registrants who wish to speak. The first one, Thomas Reps, 1010 Sherman Avenue, opposed and wishing to speak. Mr. Reps.
Yes, can I be heard here?
Yes, you can. We can hear you.
Heather, will you please put up the slides?
And you do have 3 minutes.
I will have 3 minutes when Heather puts up my slide, please.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you for the opportunity to explain my strong opposition to this proposed building. For the last 31 years, I've lived at 1010 Sherman Avenue, which is about 45 feet from the Crooks's property. Next slide, please. You're going to have to be much faster if I'm going to do it in 3 minutes. The staff report considered several of the standards for judging a conditional use application. However, they did not consider standard 9, which states that the project must create an environment of sustained aesthetic desirability with the existing or intended character of the area. The Crooks's property, as does mine, lies in the Sherman Avenue Historic District, which has been so designated for over 32 years. Next slide, please. The Wisconsin Historical Society describes it as Madison's first wave of suburban expansion, with spacious new houses on the west side of Sherman Avenue, all with lake frontages. Next slide, please. Well, the homes may be spacious, but the lots are cramped, as you can see in this diagram. To give an idea of the scale, the lake frontage on the Crooks's lot is a mere 32.63 feet. Note that the lake shore bends away from the street here, which causes the layout to be quirky. The houses are aligned to face Sherman Avenue. The fronts and backs of the houses are parallel with the street, not with the shore. Next slide, please. You can see this with the Crooks's property. The red lines are the sight lines from the two edges of their house and meet the lake shore partly on Jan Scher's property, 1 house away, and partly on my house, on my property, 2 houses away. The green lines show the dogleg shape of the Crooks's lot. Next slide, please. The house to the right of the Crooks's is owned by Peter Malone. This diagram shows what his Lakeview range looks like now. The blue box to the left is the boathouse on my property. Next slide, please. If the building is built, about half of Peter's Lakeview is blocked. The plan has the building positioned almost entirely between Peter's house and the lake, and contrary to the presentation you heard just now from staff, none of the building is actually positioned between the Crooks's house and the lake. Next slide, please. Let's get back to Standard 9. The Wisconsin statutes about historic preservation define adverse effects on historic properties, one of which is the introduction of visual, audible, or atmospheric elements that are out of character with a property. Next slide, please. The Crooks's plan is completely out of character for the neighborhood. No other house in the 1000 block and much more of Sherman Avenue has an ADU. No other house in the 1000 block and much more of Sherman Avenue has a deck on an outbuilding. Next slide, please. Let's move on to Standard 3 for judging a conditional use application. I've already established that it kills Peter Malone's view. It also has an impact on the view from Jan Scher's family room and deck, her upstairs view, and my upstairs view. Moreover, a party deck impairs the privacy of neighbors using their own yards. Next slide, please. There are alternatives to the plan. The property had a garage at one point, and a single-car garage could be built on the property with minimal impact on Peter Malone's view. Next slide, please. Other houses in the neighborhood have been altered with historically sensitive additions that extend their footprint lakeward a modest number of feet. When my next-door neighbors at 1004 Sherman did their addition in 2008, the effect on my view was negligible. Next slide, please. The proposal before you is inappropriate. First, the uses, values, and enjoyment of other property will clearly be impaired, particularly Peter Malone's. Second, an ADU with a roof deck is out of character with the Sherman Avenue Historic District. The current design is appropriate for a trailer park, and I urge you to vote it down. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Reps. Our next, are there any questions of the registrant? Seeing none, our next registrant is Peter Malone. 1022 Sherman Avenue, opposed and wishing to speak. Mr. Malone.
Thank you for allowing me to speak and for your service. I'm 77 years old and I have been involved in residential income properties since 1973. Purchased my home in 2005. It was built in 1899 and is adjacent to the ADU. An ADU is often seen as—
If you can, Mr. Malone, can you speak up a little bit or speak more directly into your microphone?
Okay, I couldn't get the screen up, so
good.
I've got my phone. All right,
Okay.
Should I start at the beginning?
Yes, why don't you?
Okay. Thank you for allowing me to speak and for your service. I am 77 years old and have been involved in residential income properties since 1973. I purchased my home in 2005 and it was built in 1899 and is adjacent to the proposed ADU. An ADU is often seen as part of a solution for adding more housing and reducing rents without changing the look and feel of the neighborhood. I support that concept, but this one does not fit into the area and it will not produce a unit with a low or moderate rent. There are many reasons to reject this ADU. Not comparable to primary home or others in the neighborhood. It's in the floodplain. The side yard setback, where I'll get into that in a minute. It affects neighbors, obstructs lake view, affects neighbor values, poor building design, not compatible with historic neighborhood, no survey, and the sewer line is higher than this location, and sewer waste does not go uphill. There have been high water levels in recent years. The parcel has a 100 and 500-year floodplain. The water approached the edge of the 500 plain in 2008 and 2018 and almost went upslope enough to get into my garage. Living units may be built in a floodplain, but the living area must be above the floodplain. Due to climate change, it is uncertain how the floodplain will be affected. I've talked to Mr. Tones about this setback. We agreed it should be 2 feet from my cement driveway, but the plat drawings always put the garage with its side on the edge of my driveway. I'm aware that at least 2 cars have hit the old garage since 2005. My fence also extends along the line of the driveway's edge and is a concern. I wonder if there will be enough room for maintenance of the fence or enough room to construct the side building. And as you heard before, the building obstructs about 2/3 of my lake view. Interesting enough, it does not obstruct any of Cook's Lakeville. And you heard the problem with my house being perpendicular to the street. I'd like to note that if I had looked at my property and this adjacent ADU was present, I would not have purchased it. I would not even have made a low ball offer. And other buyers will also think so. Yes, the market value lost by property is about $200,000. The legal requirements appear to be met on a quantitative level, like square footage, but not on an untangible, judgeable level. Separately, each might be approved, but they are in the same building. That is what you will see, and that is the building that must fit into the neighborhood, and that building design is not compatible to the primary house or other area properties. It does not fit the expectations of a lakefront development or a historical district. Even if stucco is added to the sides, it will still look like a long and ugly building that is better suited to a mobile home park. And the upper deck will produce noise that will be louder and travel further than if at ground level. It takes more than low density housing to be comparable. It is not comparable with the existing character of the area. There's a lake view from this sidewalk, and this building will block it entirely. So that building will not be hidden from view, and the building will be viewable from the sidewalk. The size, scale, and architectural features of the ADU are not comparable to the integrity of the primary house or its environment.
That's
it
about
is
an
not
extra
designed
minute.
with sensitivity to building placement or width.
Mr. Malone?
Yes?
Your 3 minutes are up. Can you wrap it up in a couple of words?
There are some places that are appropriate for ADUs, some places that are not. This place is not.
Thank you. Our next, any questions of this registrant? Our next registrant is Janice Schur, 1016 Sherman Avenue, in opposition and wishing to speak. Ms. Schur. Janice Schur.
In just a moment. Appears that that she's using an old version of Zoom.
Okay, we're trying to get a connection, so.
Says you are unmuted. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can
Oh, good.
hear you. Great.
Thank you very much. And I'd like to thank my first two presenters. They made very many good points, of which I will try to just touch on as they made such a good presentation. My name is Jan Schur, and I live at 1016 Sherman Avenue, and I live next door to the proposed project and next door to the Crookses, who moved in 2 years ago, less than 2 years ago. I have lived at this location at 1016 Sherman Avenue for 46 years. And the Crooks are the third family that has lived in that home. I sent a letter opposing things according to standards 1, 3, 5, and 9 earlier, and I stand by those. The staff report made no mention of the fact that the ADU limits the lake view of 1022 Sherman Avenue, and to a lesser extent, the lake view from my home at 1016. Your previous speaker, Pete Malone, is the person who lives at 1022 Sherman, and he clearly outlined the problem there. This fails, therefore, to meet standard number 3 by limiting the existing values and the enjoyment of the other property in the neighborhood. Certainly, limiting your lake view would fall under number 3. The staff report also fails to mention the design of the new structure. It is not a shed or a garage claiming to meet the 1988 historic standards. It is, in fact, a small home and therefore should be subject to more stringent design criteria as required in standard number 9. It should be compatible with the existing character of the Sherman Avenue Historical District, not just the reference to the 1988 National Historic District. I ask, therefore, because it is so incompatible and does not meet the historic designs that we would like, that it be referred to the Urban Design Commission, and the Urban Design Commission can then make recommendations or perhaps speak about relocation of the entire project. If you approve this conditional use, and I would ask that you call for the elimination of the 54-foot second floor deck. This is unnecessary, unsightly, and a source of potential noise, as well as the problem with neighborhood privacy. For 46 years, I have lived next door to a single family home. Now, as I near 80 years old, and I am going to be looking toward selling my home in the future, if this is approved, I will be living next door to a 2-family lot rather than a single-family lot. And I just found out by reading the staff report that the second home even will have its own street address. The rules were changed in the last few years. As of now, I don't know if my assessment will be lowered. I don't know if my property value will be lowered. Most people would probably be happy if their property assessment were lowered, but that is not the case when you are coming near to wanting to sell your home.
Ms. Shore, your 3 minutes are up. Can you wrap
Okay,
it up?
I asked for 3 different changes for conditional uses, and I asked the alderman for 3 different changes. 1, eliminate the deck. 2, refer to urban design. And number 3, I asked that the Crooks only be allowed to use it or rent it to their family members. That is in their letter of intent, that they will only use it for family members. And I asked that that be part of the conditional uses. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Shore. Are there any questions of this registrant? Seeing none, the next registrant is Michael Crooks, 1020 Sherman Avenue, in support and wishing to speak. Mr. Crooks.
Thank you, members of the Planning Commission and staff. I know this is a difficult issue, and it's obviously an emotional issue for my neighbors. Jan hit it correctly. We moved in July of 2018 to a beautiful house on 1020 Sherman Avenue. We love it. We love the historic nature of the home. It's got 3 bedrooms. It's got 2 baths, but it has no garage. And we decided when we bought the property that we were going to look to add a garage. My wife and I have 4 children. One of them recently engaged. I've got 5 siblings, and my wife has 2 siblings. And what we found out is that when folks visit us during the holidays and when they're on vacation, we have insufficient room. The solution we came up with was to build a 2-stall garage with a apartment over the whole top of it. And when we proposed that to our neighbors, we found out that Jan did not like it because of its height and its length, and Pete did not like it because it was too close to his to the lot line and would provide problems for him in pulling in and pulling out of his property. As a result, we had the project redesigned so that it was now 1 stall with the ADU off the back, and instead of the 25-foot roof height that we had originally proposed, the current design is now 9 feet from soffit to ground. We thought that would solve the problems. We asked our architect to design it in a way that would make it consistent with our home in terms of how it looked and how it appeared. And we believe he's accomplished that. It's going to be the same color as our home. It's going to have the same white wooden panels as our home, as decorative trimmings, so to speak. And it's going to be made of either stucco or EIFS. We're still waiting for a bid from our contractor on that particular issue. We don't have any desire to cause any hurt feelings or destroy people's property values. All we're trying to do is build a project which will accommodate our family, and we don't intend to rent it out to people unrelated to us. We don't intend to rent it out to anybody. We just intend to use it when our family comes to visit. The neighborhood association did vote 10-2 in favor of the project. Staff has indicated that it passes all the necessary legal requirements. And for those reasons, we ask that the Planning Commission vote to approve the project. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Crooks. Are there any questions from commissioners? Commissioner Rui.
It's really long and narrow. I'm wondering why you didn't put the ADU next to the garage, to the left side of the garage, instead of extending it back. What made you decide to do that? You've got plenty of room away from the house to do that.
Well, there's two reasons why we decided to do that. One is that would cut off more of our view than the current project does, number one. And number two, there would not be enough room for a turnaround, which we need to move vehicles in and out of there and to move a boat trailer in and out of there. So there were two reasons, one functional and one practical in terms of the view.
Actually, I don't understand the turnaround. Could you explain that? Because I didn't suggest moving the building any closer to the house. And you already have a great patio in back of your house. I asked a question, why do you need the deck if you have a good patio already?
The same reason we're looking to, why, if we were going to build it, we didn't want to go and have the space on top wasted. So we thought that this would be a great use of the space. We intend to do it very tactfully with the plexiglass panels so that you can see while you're up there. And in terms of the turnaround, you're right, we do have a nice deck, but you can't turn a vehicle around without going out onto the grass, and we plan to put cement next to it so that we can have a vehicle turnaround there. It's very narrow back here, as has been described by the other folks who have discussed the project.
Okay, so I guess what I heard from you then, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you didn't want to put the ADU beside the garage because it would obstruct your view.
Well, I think I answered it. It's twofold. One, it's view obstruction, and the other is it's to provide for a ample room to turn around and park a boat trailer.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner Hagenow.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, and I'm not sure that if you can answer this question, but there's been some concern brought up by staff about the sewer connection and the water connection there. You don't have that in the plans anywhere, and I'm just wondering how, have you thought about that? How you're going to get that out of that ADU?
I am not a engineer or a technical person. I believe our architect, Ryan, is online, and he may be better prepared to address that than I am.
Okay. And then I did have another question too about, and it's kind of along the same lines as Commissioner Ruiz was, but mine was, I was just thinking of, why wouldn't you have offset the ADU from the garage then, so that would make it maybe a little more visually appealing as well, instead of this long, skinny building there. And so do you have any thoughts on, why you didn't look at that?
No, not really. I mean, I'm not sure exactly what you're contemplating. So have two separate buildings?
Well, it'd still be one building connected, but, maybe moving that ADU over half the size of, half the width of the whole building in general. So it would, just kind of offset it a little bit. Of course, that would kind of infringe on your view then of the lake. So that may be an issue with that.
Well, it would infringe on my view more so than the current garage and ADU would. You're right about that, but I also think it would be unsightly to have another building or another. I'm not sure I'm visualizing exactly what you're suggesting.
Yeah, well, it would just be not another building, but if you just took that ADU section and kind of slid it to the southwest a little bit, I think that's the right direction. Maybe, yeah. Half the width of the garage, it would just be a little offset. So,
well, I'm not certain that Jan wouldn't object to that, because I think that would actually impinge on her view more.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hagenow. Alder Rummel.
I didn't write down the person who presented early on with the visuals. Could we have Heather put those up again and that person talk us through, now that we have sort of more knowledge of all the issues, like look at those again?
We do have one more registrant who is the architect, I believe, and one more person in opposition. But fine, we can go ahead with the.
Can you hear me? I believe I've been unmuted.
Yes.
Okay.
They haven't.
Sydney, are you able to bring up the? Okay, great.
No, you didn't.
Which slide are you looking for, Alder Rummel?
Go back a couple, just the ones, well, maybe it's also ahead, but where they were the different, like the view sheds with different, yeah, those, there was a couple in a row. Yeah, those. Thank you. And there was a third, was there a third one?
So I think you can, if you go back to that slide, I think you can see on that what I think the questions that well, you can see Pete Malone's objection completely. And as I said in my presentation, the building is almost entirely between Peter Malone's house and the lake. And if you project things straight forward from the Crooks's house, you'll see that none of the ADU, none of the garage or ADU, none of the building at all is in the straight line between their house and the lake. So the questions about putting the ADU to the side, one of the answers that Michael Crooks gave was that it would block his view, but he doesn't seem to be, he doesn't want to block his view, but he doesn't have any qualms about blocking Peter Malone's view. I really think the whole project is a really bad precedent for this neighborhood.
So Thomas, Peter is the one on the top. I'm sorry, I'm just catching up with names and places.
Yeah, Peter is the one on the top. The middle one with the green border around it is the Crooks's house.
Right.
The property just below, you can see portions of the outline of the house. That's Jan Scher's house. And then my property is the next one. I've shown the boathouse that's on my property, and then the house doesn't appear in this diagram.
Thank you. Thank you.
Did you have any other questions?
No, I just wanted to see it again because it helps me understand.
Okay. Okay. Great. Thank you. Alder Hack.
Thank you. I actually kind of I may want to see that image again. I wondered if Mr. Reps had an image that included Janet Scher's house as well as the building on her property on the lakeside.
So if you bring up that image, you can only see on that. Well, I'll wait until it comes up. So if you look just below the lower of the green lines, you'll see the outline of her house. Mm-hmm. And then I think the sort of next sort of squarish thing just below the green line where it says something about 94.5 feet up a little bit, whoever's, yeah, up right in there, you can see a little, yeah, right in there, that is the boathouse / garage that is on Jan's property. So it's, and that 94 feet, I think, refers to the entire length of the green line. I think we measured her building and it was maybe 35 feet, whereas the the building that the Crookses are planning to build is 58 feet 4 inches in length by 12 feet 1 inch wide. It's actually 705 square feet, so it actually is a little illegal. But
so Shore Boathouse is from, you're seeing just the edge of that plus.
Yeah, I think that's about 10, maybe 12 feet wide.
Okay. So, you could look at that, and because of these odd shaped lots and the way that the houses are oriented, that existing boathouse blocks some of the view of the Crooks, of the Crooks view, analogous perhaps, but maybe not to as much of a degree as the proposed ADU accessory building might block Peter Malone's. It's the angles are the same, it looks.
Yes, the angles are roughly the same. That building, I believe, is quite an old building. Maybe Jan knows when that was built. It might even be original. These houses are maybe almost 100 years old. My house is more than 100 years old. But the others, and so I mean, it was there when the Crookses bought their property. It's not a surprise that that part of their view is impinged on.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other questions of Mr. Crooks before we move on? Okay, then moving on. The next registrant is Fran Wong at 1010 Sherman Avenue, opposed and wishing to speak.
Hello?
Yes.
Okay, you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. My name is Fran Wong, and I live at 1010 Sherman Avenue. And there's one property between where I live and 1020. I'm opposed to the proposed plan for the ADU at 1020 Sherman Avenue. And I appreciate the opportunity to share my objections with the members of the Plan Commission. Sherman Avenue are unique. The properties that adjoin 1020 are oddly shaped and narrowing to approximately 36 feet as an average at the lakeshore. The street half of the lots are perpendicular to Sherman Avenue, but about halfway in, they make a dog leg bending to the right. And this is important to note because this greatly impacts the discussion, as you guys have just been doing the last several minutes, and realize the impact that it makes. I have two objections, and they both apply to standard 3. The first one is the placement and size of the ADU and its deck. Because of the ADU's location, which is at an angle to the Crooks' house, and the size of the ADU with its deck, neighbors will lose portions of their view of the lakefront. Mr. Malone will lose the most, at least 50 to 60%, and others to varying degrees, but there'll be little impact on Mr. Crooks' view. The second objection is the deck on top of the ADU structure. The plan for the proposed building includes a deck which is designed to cover the entire flat roof of the structure. The result would be 642 square feet of deck floor space. The 3-foot cable railing fence, which is going to go around the deck, would also add another dimension. This deck would almost double the size of the building. The deck's massive size, its location and proximity to neighboring property lines would definitely impact neighbors' views, as well as their privacy, with the added activity and noise associated with its use. I would like to add 3 possible options. All of them would greatly lessen the impact on the neighborhood compared to the proposed plan that was presented. The first was to use Crooks' original plan to construct just a garage without either the living quarters or the deck. The garage could either be attached or freestanding. Of course, attention would need to be given to its location so it doesn't impact neighbors' views. The second alternative is to construct the garage and the added living space as an add-on to the existing house. Several houses in our neighborhood have successfully done that. An example is our next door neighbor at 1004 Sherman. The third one, which Alderperson Heck and one of your commission staffers had, Ruin had said, was interesting about the ADU being turned at a 90-degree angle, because that was something and I had given some thought to as another alternative. And then again, you know, the issue is whose point of view of the lake is going to be affected at that point. And so that's left to be decided. So thank you for your time and attention, and I hope you will seriously consider the importance of all of my objections, and suggestions, and take the feedback, and hopefully you can make the right decision for everybody. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Our next registrant is Ryan Schultz, 316 West Washington Avenue, Madison, in support and wishing to speak. He is representing the Crookses. Go ahead, Mr. Schultz.
Thank you. Thank you, commissioners. My name is Ryan Schultz from Opening Design, representing Michael and Maura Crooks here. I'm here, to answer any technical questions, and I'll try to be brief as possible. On the issue of trying to design something that is relative to the principal project, I don't know, can anyone see my screen right now? Am I sharing my screen? Is that even possible?
No, you would have had to work with staff to have that shared.
That's fine. So the principal building is, a Tudor derivative style. Michael had referred to the trimmings on the existing building, which is basically a half timbering type of motif that you see in Tudor construction. And so we reflected that in the one-story building in terms of how we break up the facade. Obviously, a roof line has a major impact on how you view a design, what style it's in, and it would be great to actually put a hip roof on this structure to make it echo more with the principal structure. But to minimize the views, the neighbors' views to the lake, we decided, let's go as streamlined as we can and bring it down to a flat roof. So obviously, since we don't have that roof structure on there, which plays a big part of the style of a house, that's one of the main reasons why maybe it doesn't resonate as much as people think. We as a style, we would love to put that hip roof back on there, but again, I think the neighbors would probably agree that they'd rather have a flat roof. In terms of some of the technical questions that were brought up, the sewer line and the water lines, we have yet to locate them, but we will certainly, when this is pushed to permit, locate those and develop a plan on how that's going to tie into the mains at the street. The location of the ADU is pretty close to what the existing old garage was. Indeed, it is longer with the added ADU there. Positioning it where it is makes sense, obviously, in relation to the driveway, but it was also positioned where it doesn't obviously infringe upon the Crooks view, but it does in a certain degree, but it, it's not fully blocking their view, and it's positioned where it's not fully blocking the neighbor's view either. So it's one of those hopefully happy medium places we could locate it. The height of this, the existing garage that was there, and I think there was pictures available, it had a flat roof as well, and it was a nondescript tear down, unmentionable
That's your
design.
time, Mr. Schultz, if you can wrap up in a sentence or two.
Sure. So yes, hopefully this design, although it doesn't reflect the Tudor style with the hip roof, it does have certain characteristics that have timbering, and it's low profile, tries to obstruct the neighbor's views as much as possible.
Thank you. Are there any questions of Mr. Schultz? Commissioner Rui.
Thank you. I'd like some design clarifications. How long is this structure you're proposing?
Let me see.
You seem like you're not putting that dimension on your drawings.
I think I have it on there. It is 58 feet, 58
feet.
Yeah.
How deep is the existing house? How long is that?
It looks visually, I would say it's almost 58. I would say about 50 foot deep.
Usually when I looked at it, it looked shorter than the proposal when I looked at it. How wide is this structure you're proposing?
12 foot one.
12 foot. If you put a roof on, it would be a 1 foot overhang each way.
Sure, you could pick up any overhang.
Then what pitch roof would you put on?
Well, I think when we first designed it, it had a 612 pitch on it, kind of reminiscent of the principal structure.
Yeah, but now you went to 0 pitch. What pitch would work if you did not, just to make sure you didn't have a drainage problem?
Well, you can have flat roofs. You can, as long as you detail it properly, you don't necessarily have to worry about the drainage problem.
No, but I mean, how low a pitch could you get if you had to put a regular roof on?
With a shingled product, I think the lowest they recommend is a 3 to 12.
3 pitch?
But again, 3 to 12 pitch, yeah. And anything lower with the shingle, you start having water problems.
If you put a roof on, you'd raise the roof line, the profile by 4 feet at the most.
Sure. Yep. In that sense, again,
which is probably lower than the furniture that would be putting on the roof, right? If it was a flat roof.
I would say make it comparable, probably 4 foot. Yep. Okay. And it depends too on, like, as the designer in me, going with a low pitch, you're kind of reflecting more of a prairie style. So in that sense, it's still not congruous with the principal structure, if that's ultimately what you're trying to get at.
That could be said about the current design too, couldn't it?
Sure. Exactly.
No pitch. Yep. I asked this before. Why didn't you look at squaring up the building? A building that's longer than the principal structure along a property line is intriguing for me. Why didn't you look at squaring it up or sort of an offset square instead of making it 58 feet long?
Well, Michael, I think, addressed those concerns, again, impinging on his view, ultimately. This structure still impinges on their view. Let's be, I guess, realistic, is that it impinges on their view as much as it impinges on their neighbor's view. So we're trying to locate it to minimize that as much as for them as for the neighbors. So that was kind of the reason to make it long and linear, to open up more of the view to the lake.
For your client.
Correct. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions of this registrant?
Also too,
excuse me, Mr. Schultz. Seeing no other questions, I will read the other registrants into the record. Carolyn Alexander, 1154 Sherman Avenue, opposed and not wishing to speak, but available to answer questions. Christopher Casara, 1026 Sherman Avenue, opposed, available to answer questions. Bill Whitford, 1047 Sherman Avenue, opposed, not wishing to speak. Max Duckworth, 1004 Sherman Avenue, opposed, not wishing to speak. Thomas Green, 1144 Sherman Avenue, opposed, not wishing to speak. Aaron Mackesy, 1144 Sherman Avenue, opposed, not wishing to speak. Jean Kanofsky, 1023 Sherman Avenue, opposed, not wishing to speak. Are there questions of any of the registrants? Alder Heck.
Thank you. First, a just a quick question for Mr. Schultz, who just spoke. You were ending with the height of the earlier garage, and I wanted you to complete that thought, and as well as tell us the height of the proposed building.
Sure. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes, the proposed structure is 9 foot to the underside of the soffit, and then it will be the actual soffit depth in the structure, which would probably be a foot, and then accommodate some type of small pitch, probably very slight pitch. So probably 10.5 feet, to the top. The proposed garage, I can pull it up. I believe was comparable to that. It was 9-10 foot. I can actually pull it up. I might take some time, but
that's close enough, I think, Doug.
Okay.
Thanks. That's my only question for Mr. Schultz, but a question for Mr. Crooks. I'm interested in, there's been discussion from some of your neighbors about other properties on the lakeside of Sherman Avenue have chosen to build onto their principal structures rather than building a separate ADU. Can you address why that why it isn't feasible to add on to your property, your current structure?
Sure. There are two reasons. One is that doesn't give us a garage. And the other reason is architecturally, the only place to add on to the house, given how it's positioned on the lot, would be on the back side of it. And there's a huge inlet, if you will, that runs the entire height of our house. And the last or the top of that inlet is a bathroom. And we couldn't figure out how to add on that space and have a garage in an economical fashion. Also, we've got a humongous tree that is probably 100 years old that is within 4 or 5 feet of the back of our house and is absolutely gorgeous. And we would not want to lose that as part of any work done on the house.
Mm-hmm. I've heard some of your neighbors say that they wouldn't object if you put a replacement garage in, and that the scale of that seemed fairly agreeable to some of them. I don't know about all of them. So even if you were just to add on to the back of your house, something approximately the square footage of the ADU component of the accessory building, you don't think is feasible?
I don't think so. We haven't had an architect specifically study that, but I don't think it's feasible. And if we did add on to the back of our house, that would completely cut off Jan's view, because Jan's view is through her side windows is in between the existing house and that tree that is 4 or 5 feet off the back of our house.
Mm-hmm.
So that might solve part of Pete's problem, but it would virtually eliminate Jan's view to the right. And I should mention also, Pete's house is raised, and Pete actually lives on the top floor. So I'm not really sure how this garage with the ADU is going to impact his view at all, especially not from where he currently resides on the second floor unit.
But there are windows on all 3 floors in his house, correct?
Yeah, but the first floor is actually raised up, and I don't know how high it is, but you're right. There are windows on. I think it's only 2 floors actually in a basement, but the basement is raised. I've never been inside, so I don't know for sure.
Yeah, I was back there and took some pictures, as you know, and I can see that now. It looks like the basement in the very back is about the height of the standard Madison garbage cans, and then the first floor starts. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Alder Rummel, did you? Alder Rummel.
A question for Mr. Crooks. One of the comments we have in our packet is wondering about whether this would be used at all for tourists as a tourist rooming house, and I just wondered if you would care to respond to that question.
I'm sorry, did you say as a tourist rooming house?
That's our technical words, because there's more than one platform for what you would maybe think of as an Airbnb.
Oh, okay. I understand. Absolutely not. We have no desire to use it for anyone other than family members.
Thank you.
Any other question of any of the registrants? Alder Heck.
Thank you. One more question for Mr. Crooks. Some of your neighbors have expressed a desire to eliminate the deck aspect of the accessory building. What's your reaction to that?
It seems like a very clever, useful use of the space that our architect actually proposed and came up with. Actually, it might have been our builder, one of the two, and we thought it was a great idea so that during the warm months, we could actually use the flat roof. And so we think it would be a waste to eliminate it. And I understand the concerns, but I'm a 55-year-old man with 4 grown children. We're not really into raucous partying. But I suppose a future owner might use it differently than we intend.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for any of the registrants? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing. Are there questions of staff? Commissioner Cantrell.
I guess, is staff aware of any other ADUs on the lake?
Could the staff who's going to respond please raise their hand? Ms. Prusak.
There was recently an ADU approved on Lake Mendota Drive, but this ADU was on the street side of the lot. I believe it was 5438 Lake Mendota Drive, if I recall. There's been a lot of proposals there. And it was on the front of the building, so not necessarily comparable.
Okay, so it wasn't on the lake side of the property. Okay.
Correct.
Mr. Tucker, I think, had something to add to that.
Yes, there was a ADU approved on a lakefront property out on the north side of town, out towards Mendota Mental Health Facility. That one was on the street side. That was approved probably 6 years ago on Woodward Drive. And there have been a number of finished and fully conditioned spaces on the lakeside that have been approved. rooms that have been built that basically what they lacked was maybe a bedroom or a kitchen or something like that that would have qualified them as a dwelling unit, but they were otherwise fully finished and habitable type structures.
But they were incorporated in the home?
No, these were detached accessory structures located on the water side of where the home is located.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Alder Rummel.
Thank you. On page 3 and 4 of the staff report, you refer to the preservation planner Heather Bailey's comments about the Sherman Avenue National Register Historic District. Now, I understand it's not a local district. There isn't authority, but at least one of the comments we received mentioned that the view from, and Ms. Bailey talked about there was no view from that would impact the Sherman Avenue block face, but at least one person testifying, at least through letters, suggested it would. If anybody has any more knowledge about Ms. Bailey's review, I would appreciate it.
Ms. Prusak, do you have anything?
More so that is because this is an accessory building. She mentioned how it's like accessory buildings in the historic district are supposed to be placed in the rear of the site and be non-discrete. I don't have more information about how it affects the block face, but her findings were that it didn't have a bad negative effects on the district.
I have one more question, Chair. One of the registrants tonight, Ms. Schur, requested us to refer to Urban Design Commission, and she invoked the standard number 9 that allows that to happen. And I'm wondering what Ms. Prusak would say could be accomplished if there was a referral to urban design.
It's very rare. Maybe Heather or Matt can jump in. I can't think of an example when a single family home was referred to Urban Design Commission unless it was part of a plan development where Urban Design Commission is required. Plan Commission is usually the main body that reviews single family residences or things that happen on single family lots. I don't know if Heather or Matt can think of an example, but
Ms. Stouter, did you have anything to?
No examples. I guess I would recommend that the Plan Commission make a decision and not refer to the Urban Design Commission. I'm not sure that they're not accustomed to reviewing this scale of design, and I don't know that they would add any additional value pertaining to the condition or the standards that you're really looking at for this proposal.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Stouter. Thank you, Ms. Prusak. Did you have anything else, Alder? Alder Heck.
Thank you. I imagine this question is for Ms. Stouter, but we'll see. The first conditional use that we're considering is for construction of an accessory building greater than 576 square feet. And this proposed building is, I think, 700 square feet. Do you recommend when we apply the standards to this conditional use that we think of it as in comparison to a 575 square foot building, or should we be doing it on the merits of the entire structure? If you get the gist of my question.
I mean, regarding the size, I think you're taking into account a few different things. The merits of the structure as a whole, the impacts that structure has on the character of the surrounding properties. You know, how out of scale is it with other accessory buildings in the area, and then also the lot size. I mean, I think for a 700 or 800 square foot accessory building on a 3,000 square foot lot would be different than this one that's on a longer, more spacious lot. And so I think you're taking into account the lot characteristics too, with regard to the size of the structure.
in the back of my mind, I keep thinking, though, if this was 575 square feet, we wouldn't even be evaluating these standards with regard to size. It would only be with regard to the ADU component and no consideration about the size at all, unless it were under the lakefront development standards.
Right, that it would fall under the lakefront development standards as well. So it would still be a conditional use in that case if it were over, if it were a new accessory building on the lake.
Thank you.
Commissioner Spencer.
Thanks. I also had just a general question about the size of it. I think it's 124 square feet higher than what's allowed. And I was just wondering, is that really recommended that we go so much higher? But I think that Commissioner Heck and Heather discussed that. And then I was also wondering, is this in a 100-year floodplain, or is it a 500-year floodplain? I can't tell like exactly where those boundaries are on the map. And then is it advisable that we even, because it seems like the extra portion of it, or a good portion of it, at least half, less than half, is in that floodplain. Is it advisable to do that?
Oh, I'm sorry. Mr. Tucker, I think, can respond to that.
Thanks.
Yes, I can. So start with the 500-year floodplain. The 500-year floodplain is not a regulatory floodplain.
Okay.
It is a elevation that is the 1% chance flood. It is nothing in our ordinances from a regulatory standpoint. The 100-year floodplain is the relevant ordinance section. And as presented, it doesn't appear as though the structure will project into the 100-year floodplain.
Okay.
And also the flood storage area. There is a patio or some kind of a feature that does look like it projects into that area. There are requirements that need to be met when any material is being placed in a floodplain. And one of the basic ordinance requirements that'll need to be met that our office will look for is compliance with the floodplain regulations, regardless of the action of the Plan Commission. There are very limiting provisions for placing structures in the floodplain and extremely challenging restrictions for placing a habitable structure in the floodplain. So if the structure ends up being in the floodplain as mapped and as we discover, it's likely going to have to move, or other actions are going to have to occur to satisfy any floodplain zoning requirements. But as it sits today, what they presented is no, it is not in the floodplain.
Okay, thanks.
Commissioner Rui.
Thank you. This is for Mr. Tucker in regards to the floodplain. I'm under the understanding that all the floodplains are being revised and all the flood projections are being revised because of the more current events. And is it possible that the floodplain, 200-year floodplain, would be closer to the 500-year floodplain by the time we're done, or the 100-year floodplain? I know they're being revised nationally, and I assume in Wisconsin also.
Sure. So every, 5, 7, 8 years or so, FEMA does a new study or a partial study of areas in our region in Dane County. The big change to the floodplain occurred in 2009, where they raised the elevation of the floodplain on Lake Mendota. I believe it was a foot, which substantially changed, obviously, the floodplain. But in turn, they also had a much higher level of detail about where the floodplain falls. They used 6-inch LIDAR, which is basically like an infrared way to measure the grades on the ground to really determine the actual location of the grades on the ground. I'm not aware that there's any active effort right now to remap or raise the flood elevation on Lake Mendota, Monona, anywhere in the city of Madison, but we will continue to receive updated and revised maps as new and better data comes online. every probably 4 or 5 years. You'll see that on Plan Commission agendas. Many of you that have been on for a while have probably noticed those items.
Okay, thank you.
Are there other, Alder Heck?
Thank you. This is probably for Ms. Stouter. Again, I want to make sure that we understand the approval standards that we're applying in this situation. And I'm interested in approval standard A3, I guess, that reads the uses, values, and enjoyment of other property in the neighborhood for purposes already established will not be substantially impaired or diminished in any foreseeable manner. And this is one that we often talk about. I know that we've seen language recently in recent times that says that Plan Commission cannot find this standard met. If they do, they have to cite substantial evidence in their reasoning and motion. And I wondered, I mean, those words make sense to me, but do you have any practical example or clarifying advice about how to apply that standard? And what does evidence consist of?
9.
Oh, sorry.
Sure. I mean, I do think that it's much easier with things that are, with things that are more obvious. You know, if you have an industrial use that's going to have a certain noise level within X feet of residential property based on a conditional use review, it's much easier to try to find substantial evidence. You can find numbers, you can more easily cite facts and figures that will bolster a case for a Plan Commission decision. I mean, in this case, it's it's a very, very low building in the back of a property. And I think that it's difficult to find a lot of other examples to try to cite, how have property values changed due to similar structures being built? How have the enjoyment of property changed due to similar structures being built? Those are really tough numbers to find. And so I think that's why we're just cautioning the Plan Commission that, if you do make a finding based on that standard, we as staff can't think of substantial evidence that would lead the Plan Commission down that path. But we really want to caution you to come up with something if you end up using that standard as a way to move to deny the request.
Okay, thank you. That helps.
Any other questions of staff? Seeing none, I am looking then for a motion. Commissioner Cantrell.
I'm going to recommend that the Plan Commission find that the conditional use standard cannot be met, specifically for condition number 3. And it's because of the shape of the building. The 58-foot length of this building is so out of character with the other surrounding accessory buildings on lake property within this vicinity. And I think there are other alternatives that are available to this property owner that would not substantially impair the uses, values, and enjoyment of other properties in addition to his own. So that's what I'm recommending on this conditional use request.
I'm looking for a second. Commissioner Rui?
I'll second that. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Cantrell, did you want to speak any further to your motion?
I think that my remarks have been are reflective of my feeling on this development. I think that there's an alternative here for the applicant that even the Plan Commission members described, of having the garage, the ADU, and next or joining the one car garage, that would not impair the views and the values of other properties in the area. And again, I think that this building, which is 58 feet long, it's so different than other accessory buildings within this area. It's really out of character, and I think that's the main objection.
Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Any other comments, thoughts from commissioners? Alder Heck.
Thank you. With regard to the motion, I worry, though, that I don't know as if there's a good solution that isn't going to impinge on a neighbor's view. As we discussed some of the options, if the ADU component is shifted southwest, then it impacts the neighbor to the southwest, giving some relief to the neighbor to the northeast. And I think that the problem is the shapes of these lots and the orientation of the houses makes this project very difficult. I don't think there's a way to do it without impinging a great deal on somebody's enjoyment and value of their property. And that said, I think the motion still has some validity, and it may be that a building of this square footage is going to have that impact no matter what, but I don't really know yet. That's all for now. Thanks.
Commissioner Rui.
Thank you. I had some additional concerns. I didn't think it met condition 9 either. Architecturally, it doesn't seem compatible with the historic nature of the neighborhood. I had a concern about, and I don't know how to put it, the owner did not want to impact his view, but had an adverse impact on another's view. Typically, I'm not worried about views. I always consider views are borrowed. You don't have a right to them, but in this case, there's an option that would have architecturally looked better and not impacted view. I'm also concerned about it going in, even though legally it's not an issue, going into the 500-year floodplain, which is probably only a half a foot higher than 100-year floodplain. Long term, I think that's going to be detrimental, is going into that. But right now, I look at this architecturally as a 10-foot high wall, almost 60 feet long. And architecturally, that really bothers me, let alone the elevated view that can be used up on top. So I'm fully in support of the motion as made.
Thank you, Commissioner Rui. Commissioner Hagenel.
I'm also fully in support of the motion for many of the kind of reasons that have already been addressed. I really have a hard time finding this fitting into the kind of normal and orderly kind of development along there. That building is just so long. It just really just strikes me as sticking out and not compatible. And then, I mean, I agree with Commissioner Rui with the sight lines being more borrowed than anything. However, you know, when you start coupling all that stuff together, it just makes it a really hard development to believe makes sense and fits. So for those reasons, I'm going to be voting in favor of the motion. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Hagenow. Alder Rummel, did you wish to speak?
Thank you. I had stepped away for a moment, so I missed the motion. I'd like to have it restated, but I'm sort of glimmering what it might be. Because for me, I found a problem with it, with the proposal meeting standards 3, 4, and 9. And so I will look forward to hearing the exact motion. But the other thing is, like, this isn't just the family's use of this property, it's the long-term use of this property, whoever owns it. So I think between the floodplain and the architectural wall, as it was described, and having an accessory dwelling unit that other people may, you know, wish to remove the restrictive covenant and have it as a rental. I mean, that just seems like there's all these issues, and the noise of the deck. And I hear the view shed isn't really a right, but you know, if yours isn't really impinged on, but other people's are, it just doesn't seem fair, if nothing else. So thank you.
Ms. Stouter, can you restate the motion, please, for Alder Rummel?
Sure. Commissioner Cantrell made a motion to find that standard 3 was not met and not to approve the request this evening.
Thank you. Commissioner Cantrell.
I would also, I guess, state that I find that standard 9, as Commissioner Rui and Commissioner Rummel indicated, that it doesn't meet that standard as well, because that standard says that new construction of a building or addition to an existing building, the Plan Commission shall find that the project creates an environment of sustained aesthetic desirability compatible with the existing or intended character of the area. I don't think that this proposed building does that.
Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Are there any other? Commissioner Sundquist.
Yeah, just I'll support the motion. I think shoehorning this particular building in the way it is others have spoken to that. I did want to just speak for a second on the public policy question about ADUs, and in the reason, one of the main motivation that we have for trying to encourage ADUs or allow them is to add a mild amount of density in single family home neighborhoods, and this doesn't even do that. It's I have the opposite question that, or issue that Alder Rummel raised. I mean, I think it would be better if it provided some more housing in our housing starved isthmus, and that's really when we've talked about, should single family zones go away, as in Minneapolis, that's really the what they're talking about there. Anyway, this doesn't even do that. I just wanted to throw that in as a public policy footnote for the future. But I will be voting with in favor of this motion.
Thank you, Commissioner Sundquist. I see no further hands raised. So we will be voting on the motion, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand to object. Seeing none, Motion passes unanimously. And we will move on then to the last item on our agenda. Agenda item 10, Legistar 59930. And I believe Ms. Prusak will be
Madam Chair?
describing. Yes.
Madam Chair, can I just ask for clarification from the commission on whether the last vote and motion was made with or without prejudice, meaning can this applicant come back with a revised approach within the following year, or was this a motion made with prejudice?
I think it was without prejudice, and I'm seeing agreement among the commissioners. Yes,
Okay.
without prejudice. Thank you. Ms. Prusak.
Thank you. So moving on to the other side of Madison, but another accessory building, this time not on a lakefront parcel, and this time not an accessory dwelling unit. The applicants request approval of a conditional use to construct a 1,173 square foot accessory building. This is a suburban residential district, so unlike the traditional residential district that we just looked at, the maximum size for accessory buildings in these districts is 800 square feet unless allowed by conditional use approval from the Plan Commission. So as proposed, this accessory building will contain a 2-car garage with additional storage and workshop space. The existing driveway to the accessory building will remain, and the portion of the building that has a garage will occupy roughly the same space where the garage is now. Staff notes that the subject property is a designated landmark in the Merrill Spring Mound Group, as there is a burial mound located on the property, but the proposed accessory building is not located within the cataloged area. The applicants submitted a request to disturb a human burial site with the State Historical Office and went before the city's Landmark Commission for a certificate of appropriateness. Both were authorized and approved with conditions. And so given the Landmarks Commission finding and the design and the location on the site, the Planning Division believes that the conditional use approval standards can be found met and recommends that it be approved by the Plan Commission. And I'll turn it back to you, and we'll be open for questions after the public hearing.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Prusak. I'm not sure that I read the Legistar number in the description, so let me do that just in case. So it's Legistar 59930, located at 5101 Lake Mendota Drive, 19th Alder District, consideration of a conditional use in the suburban residential consistent 1 district to construct accessory building exceeding 800 square feet of area. And with that, I will open the public hearing, and we do have a couple of registrants here. The first one is Linda Nelson, located at 5100 Lake Mendota Drive, opposing and wishing to speak. Ms. Nelson.
Hi, I'm Linda.
Okay. Yes, we can hear you.
Yes, I live across the street from this property, and my concern is why someone needs an 1,163 foot building on their property. Why is this necessary? And I'm wondering if this is going to be a business. And if it is a business, I would like to know that. It also seems from the map that it's very close to a couple of property lines, even though I'm across the street. It seems to be very, very close to 2 other budding properties, which kind of scares me a lot. But I guess I'm mainly concerned is, again, the architecture of our neighborhood. Is this compatible in our neighborhood as well? We are right above Lake Mendota, and it's a beautiful neighborhood. And why do we want to have an 1,100 square foot building in our midst? So, you know, and if it is going to be a business, we should know that, because that's going to cause an increase in traffic, an increase in noise in our neighborhood. And lastly, every day I'm now seeing many young parents with strollers and babies and little kids and bikes, and maybe due to the virus, but everybody is out nonstop. And I wouldn't want to see children in harm's way or parents and strollers in harm's way. But I'm just concerned as to why someone needs such a large building on a piece of property so close to the lake, even though it's certainly not affecting the lake. But that's all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Nelson.
You're welcome.
Any questions of the registrant? Seeing none, moving on to the next registrant, who is Susan Slattery at 5109 Lake Mendota Drive, neither support nor opposed, and wishing to speak. Ms. Slattery.
Thank you. I reside at 5109 Lake Mendota Drive, and my property is contiguous with this property. And I am requesting more clarification on the project and wanting some reassurance that it is, as Ms. Nelson said, not going to be a commercial property, but commercial business on the site, and would just be concerns regarding noise control and increased traffic. So I also wanted to know if the lot lines meet the city's requirements. I think it's 11 or 12 feet from the property line. And correct me if I'm wrong. And then I believe it is zoned as a single family home. Again, I think that is how it was listed in the MLS anyway, but I don't have I didn't look it up through the city, but those are my questions and those are my concerns.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Slattery, and we will be hearing from staff about those questions, so thank you. The next registrant, did anybody have any questions of Ms. Slattery? Seeing none, the next registrant is Eric Infield, 5101 Lake Mendota Drive, in support and wishing to speak. Mr. Infield.
Hello? Am I on?
Yes, you are.
Okay. This is my first time doing Zoom. Anyway, I'm the owner of the property along with my wife, Marie. And to answer the question stated above, what's existing now is a small one-car garage with a what had been a chicken coop turned into an office that's very narrow. At any rate, I do carpentry work, residential in other people's homes for a living, but this is not going to be a commercial business here. I'm not making a cabinet shop or anything like that. I have quite a bit of large power tools that I inherited from my father because I grew up doing woodworking, table saw, radial arm saw, that type of thing. And the house was built in 1895, stone foundation. The stairway going down to the basement is barely 2 feet wide. So I physically cannot get tools down into the basement that I own. So that's why I need to have the size building that I have. So I want to have a 2-car garage, and then which is the same footprint of what's there right now. And then instead of having separate little storage units for riding lawnmower and that type of stuff, I want to have a space to put my tools. I've had it that way. The tools are in the existing building right now. They've been that way for 2 years. I don't think that I've made any noise or disturbed anybody. The use of the building is not going to change at all. It just is going to allow us to have a little more storage space and put a car inside the garage instead of out the driveway. So again, like I said, this is not going to become a business. There's not going to be any increased traffic. It's just my wife and I. We designed that garage to try and get low and, not be a big monstrosity because, 1,100 square feet sounds like a gigantic garage. So it's stepped back and looks like it's in 2 different positions when you look at the drawings. And anyway, that's the reason that we need it. And we're 3.5 feet away from the one property line, and you're required to be 3 feet off, and we're 3 feet off the other line. The person who it affects the most is our neighbor directly to the south of us, and they are aware of what's going on and have given us the approval. And so at any rate, I'll be willing to answer any questions anybody has.
Thank you, Mr. Infield. Are there any questions of Mr. Infield from commissioners? Seeing none, the last registrant is Marie Infield at 5101 Lake Mendota Drive, in support but not wishing to speak and available to answer questions. Are there any questions of any of the registrants? Commissioner Cantrell.
Could the applicant speak a little bit more to his woodworking operation? I'm assuming that's going to be in the proposed shed that he's adding on to the garage. And could he elaborate more about that with materials? And I know he talked about some equipment that he had, but I guess I would like to hear a little bit more about that.
Mr. Infield?
Am I muted or unmuted?
There you go. You're on.
Okay, thanks. No, what I do for a living is residential remodeling. So I, do kitchens and bathrooms in people's houses. I don't do any work here. Occasionally I might build a piece of furniture for somebody, or, a bathroom vanity. But other than that, it's the tools that I have in the workshop. As I said, I've had, my whole life. Most of them were my father's tools that I inherited from him. I build musical instruments sometimes for myself. I just enjoy doing woodworking as a hobby. And so at any rate, the house that I lived in previously was on the Near East Side, and I was able to have my workshop down in the basement, which was wonderful. This particular house, I cannot physically get machinery down in there. But I'm respectful of neighbors. I'm not going to be out at midnight, with heavy machinery running all the time. I mean, it's pretty much just a place to store tools that I use, actually quite seldomly, in all honesty. So, but I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. One other follow-up question. So the existing building on that site, you're removing, you're going to be tearing that down. Is that correct?
Yes, okay. Exactly. And what that has right now is, like I said, it's a one-car garage with just some doors that swing open. And then on the other side of it is just a single 3-foot service door. And that area is, I think, 9 feet wide by the depth of the garage, which is 22 feet. And I have, my table, all the tools are still in there. I mean, I have my table saw and a radial arm saw, which is, basically just a bench to put stuff on. But at any rate, and for the past 2 years, I've been using it the way that I will continue to use it. And so if anybody's been aware of excessive noise coming from there, please let me know. But I don't think that I don't think anybody even knew it was inside the garage until I talked about it tonight. So the use of it's not going to change with this building at all.
Okay, so right now you don't really have a garage. You're just using it for your
well, the one part of it, yes, I have the part that's 10 feet by 22 feet with just a 3-foot, entrance door. I'm using as, where my tools are stored and whatnot. And occasionally I do build a few things in there. And then in the one car part, right now we put our sailboat in there for the winter time, but that leaks. The first winter we were here, water got in it, it froze. And so we actually have a storage or one of these canvas garages that we put out in the driveway this winter, and our car is parked in that. And so by building the garage, we can eliminate having that eyesore thing sitting in the driveway and actually, put a car in the garage and utilize it as a garage.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Commissioner Cantrell. Commissioner Rui.
I'm going to apologize. This is for the applicant again. Who are you going to have for a builder?
Be the builder.
I'm sorry.
Was I still muted?
No, you're on. Go.
Okay, I get a thing flashed up. You're unmuted. No, I am going to be the builder. Yes.
I'm sorry. I was just being facetious. I'm sorry I asked the question.
No, but that's fine.
Okay. Any other questions of any of the registrants? Seeing none, I'm looking for a motion, please. Commissioner Cantrell.
I'll recommend that the Plan Commission find the conditional use standards are met and approve the construction of accessory building exceeding 800 square feet.
And second, Commissioner Rui.
I'll second that, and I want to thank Ms. Prusak for her presentations on the last two items. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Cantrell, did you wish to speak to your motion?
No, well, the only, I know that some individuals raised concerns about a business being operated on the property. There are a lot of restrictions on that, and I think that planning staff and zoning administration staff can can address those, and that should not be a concern. But if it does become a concern, the city would certainly address that.
Alder Furman, did you wish to speak?
Thank you, Chair. I was actually just going to have staff address the commercial use and just let the residents know that are here know that that obviously that's prohibited and what the procedure would be like. But I'm okay with what's been explained, and they're welcome to obviously reach out to staff or reach out to me, and I can give them more details on that.
Okay, thank you, Alder. Any other comments? If not, we will come to a vote, and I will assume unanimous consent unless I see a raised hand. I do not. The motion passes unanimously. Is there any business by members? Seeing none, I will, we are now at adjournment, and I will, is there a motion to adjourn? Commissioner Rui moved. Is there a second? Commissioner Hagenow. I will assume unanimous consent, and we are adjourned. Thank you.